Welcome to Educational Theory in Physical Education, edTPA. I'm Rebekah Johnson. I'm an assistant professor and department chair at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I was trained in 2016 to be an edTPA scorer for physical education. And since then, I have been supporting teacher candidates in completing their edTPA, as well as developing resource materials to be shared at both state and national presentations. I always ask students, faculty, and cooperating teachers the same question: what challenges you most about edTPA? I hear a lot of different answers, but some of the common themes are students struggle with digesting the handbook and all of the requirements. They're unsure of what step to take next when they're performing the edTPA assessment. Cooperating teachers don't know what type of support is acceptable. And faculty members often wonder how to align edTPA prep with their coursework or how to support teacher candidates when they're out completing the assessment. For this session, we're going to focus on educational research and theory. And the first objective is to identify the areas in which students need to apply educational research and theory. Then we're going to talk about how to utilize support documents to align edTPA preparation with existing coursework and how to build competency in those essential skills. And lastly, to recognize the Physical Education Online Preparation Guide as both an educational tool as well as a support for teacher candidates completing edTPA. Educational research and theory. Again, this is one of those areas like academic language and task 3 that students struggle with. One of the resources that is part of the edTPA online preparation guide and is shared with you in conjunction with this session is an educational theory handout. My students find this so helpful to have that reference sheet to remind them about those educational theorists that they read about in prior coursework. It gives them a description of each theory as well as an application for PE, so they can really see how that theory is used and make that connection to their learning segment. Another thing we do at Carthage is to provide opportunities for students to practice citing theory and supporting their decisions with theory throughout their coursework. The 3 areas in which edTPA asks teacher candidates to use theory is in supporting their instructional choices, in suggesting changes to their teaching practice, and to guide their next steps for instruction. So in the preparation materials for the edTPA preparation guide, for research and theory, there is a prep material designed around each of these essential skills. And those materials can be used in coursework as a model and as an activity to practice, and they could be used for teacher candidates to reference while they're out completing their edTPA assessment. And lastly, students need to practice scoring with the rubrics. So having practice prompts and responses and scoring opportunities where they can get used to the commentary prompts and breaking them down, as well as self-scoring to identify areas for improvement. So taking a look at task 1, the skill that utilizes educational research and theory is to support instructional choices. To do that, we have to back up a couple steps to make sure we lay the foundation to do this well. The first step is to ask teacher candidates to complete a pre-assessment of learning, skills, and assets. This is really important for students to be able to know what their students can do, what they already know how to do, what cultural or community assets are related to their central focus. Next, they organize that information in the responses on the planning commentary for 2A and 2B. And they talk about what prior skills and knowledge students have, they're still learning to do, the interests, everyday experiences, and assets. They organize that information. The next step is to identify appropriate learning tasks and equipment. And this is the heart of the instructional choices. And last, they select research or theory that supports that choice. It's really important then for faculty members to encourage them to clearly connect those three in their response in 3A. The learning task, the student learning or assets, and then the research or theory. So for example, for all of the educational theory examples today, we're going to talk about the same learning segment, a middle school dance learning segment. So for this example, a teacher candidate might write, the self-determination theory explains that autonomy, relatedness, and competence are integral to motivation. In a creative dance learning segment where students are working in groups, motivation is very important. To build competence, the whole class will learn and practice a dance created by last year's 8th graders. Because the whole class has never created their own dance before, performing the basic movements of the dance together, this will show students all the requirements of the creative dance performance. Students will also be most comfortable dancing with other students that they know and work well with. This sense of relatedness will assist in their motivation to work together and complete the choreography and perform the dance. Because of some students indicating a low interest in dance on the pre-assessment, students being able to choose their own music or manipulatives like basketballs or hockey sticks will allow for a student's sense of autonomy. Having this choice, students may be more likely to be motivated than if I were to select the song and manipulatives. So it's really important to give them those examples of taking the learning task, a student learning need or asset, and connecting that with research and theory. If they ignored research and theory in these responses, on this rubric, the highest they could score is a 2. If they just make superficial connections, they can score a 3. If they make more clear or strong justifications, they can score a 4 or 5. So educational research and theory can be tied to a really important couple points that a student could earn on rubrics in Task 1, Task 2, Task 3. So as we look at Task 2, this is the task where students have already taught their lessons, they've filmed them, they've selected a clip, then they've began to write the commentary about that clip. And one of the commentary questions asks teacher candidates to identify the learning needs of the whole class, for their variety of learners, which could be anyone they highlighted on that context for learning, as well as individuals or groups needing greater challenge or support. So they start by identifying those learning needs and suggesting changes to instruction. That's their response for 5A on the commentary. But next, leading into 5B, they will need to provide evidence of student learning and find research that supports their suggested changes. And in 5B, they clearly connect this together. Changes that will improve student learning based on the evidence of what students can do, and then research or theory to back that up. So for example, a proposed change might be in this middle school creative dance learning segment is adding an opportunity for groups to provide peer feedback before the performance using the rubrics. How that would improve learning. Students would have an opportunity to peer assess and provide feedback based on the criteria on the performance rubric. Students would use and develop language and knowledge, and maybe better to perform on their psychomotor and cognitive assessments. So then you support this with the evidence of student learning and research and theory. Students failing to include specific movements in their performance to score low on the psychomotor rubric, or low scores on the cognitive tests, or on the closure at the end of class, students can't recite the learning cues or the descriptions of the different dance moves. So then research and theory that would support this change, and remember the change was to provide this opportunity for peer feedback. Vygotsky's importance of language suggests that social interactions support the development of language, and sharing feedback with the peers would allow for students to understand the components of the performance and interact with the language more. You want to remember here to remind teacher candidates that the proposed changes shouldn't be superficial management changes, but they should be really tied to a student learning. In task 3, this is the assessment task, where teacher candidates are gathering student work samples, video form and written form. They're providing evidence of feedback, they're showing evaluation criteria, and writing the assessment commentary. And in 4A on the assessment commentary, it asks teacher candidates to describe the next steps for instruction. So what are the next steps for the whole class? For students that are in the variety of learners, for individuals or groups, greater need for challenge or support. So they're identifying those next steps for each of those groups in 4A. As they get ready and prepare for 4B, they want to identify and pull evidence from their student learning analysis they completed in 1B to 1D. They're selecting research or theory that supports these next steps. And again, an emphasis on this clear connection between next steps, student learning, and research. So for example, a next step for instruction might be that groups that did not meet all the requirements will be given time to revise, practice, and re-perform their dance based on the feedback provided. The evidence cited from student learning are the 3 groups that scored low on the psychomotor assessment at 2 or below, how research and theory supports this next step. Dave's taxonomy of the psychomotor domain suggests that students need to practice in order to execute movements with precision. This extra time to receive feedback, refine the movements, and practice before performing their dance again might help them to reach that psychomotor learning objective. So in summary, the educational theory resources that are provided is that educational theory handout with the overview of the theorists, the applications for PE, that 2-sided, 1-page grab-and-go document that's really helpful for teacher candidates. The educational theory preparation activity for task 1, so the one that's based on those instructional choices. It includes a scenario of our teacher candidate who's planning this dance learning segment, modeling of the skill, a practice activity for teacher candidates or PET students to practice this skill. It could be in an authentic setting in a field placement, could be amongst their peers, and then an opportunity for them to practice the prompt and have the prompt scored, whether that's self-scoring, peer scoring, faculty scoring, but practicing writing those prompts, breaking them down. Each of the preparation materials within the edTPA online prep guide follows this model: scenario, model, practice, prompt writing, score the prompt. Lastly, a really important resource is the response supports to make sure that we are breaking down those commentary prompts so that students aren't missing a major component. Sometimes students miss citing evidence, a timestamp in task 2, or a student work sample in task 3. Sometimes students don't respond to educational research and theory. They don't understand how they're supporting academic language. So having a way to break down the commentary prompts is incredibly helpful for students. The Physical Education Online Preparation Guide was designed by myself and a past student of mine who had been through the edTPA process, who had passed himself and is now a K-12 PE teacher. We've worked together to design a preparation guide that really targets the needs of teacher candidates today. And I'll go through a couple of the different components here. First, the digital workbook. One of the things I hear most from my students and students that I've talked to at state and national conventions is that it's hard to keep going. They're not sure what the next step is. They only meet every other week with a seminar class. And the digital workbook is the guide that walks you through the process. As you can see, there's a progress bar on the left side that shows making progress along the assessment. Each step that's not explicitly outlined in the handbook but needs to happen is laid out here. Setting yourself up with a plan for success to make sure you are submitted on time, that you give yourself enough time to work on task 3 instead of having that rushed at the end, because we all know there's so many components to task 3. How are you going to organize your edTPA materials? Where do you find them? What are you going to say to your cooperating teacher if they've never had a student completing an edTPA before? So we have an example cooperating teacher video. Each step in the process has a short video tutorial, a resource that's either a template or a guide or a tool to help complete that step. Exemplars are placed in where appropriate so students can see examples. And then checklists. What do you need to do before you move on to the next thing? How can you go back and check that you're avoiding anything that might score an automatic 1 on a rubric? Those checklists are built in to help the student go back and do a self-assessment. The exemplars range all the tasks. They range across grade levels and content areas, and they're meant to give students a visual of, this is what instructional materials look like. This is what evaluation criteria should look like. So those exemplars are targeted to address different levels, different content areas, and provide great visuals for students. Lastly is the preparation materials area, and this is really targeted for the PET faculty. There are 16 different essential skills that are identified that can be practiced in preliminary coursework to give students a really good experience with that skill, give them the confidence that when they see that again in edTPA, they know what to do. So for example, in task 1 for planning, there's a pre-assessment of student learning and assets. So they can see a model of that, they can create their own, they can test it out at a field study or on their peers. Then they get practice writing prompts and scoring prompts. We talked about the 3 different essential skills used in educational research and theory. There's skills needed for academic language and supports, and so these preparation materials are meant to help faculty support teacher candidates' readiness for edTPA. I want to thank you all for attending today. I really enjoy the opportunity to share with folks things that I've learned along the way to support teacher candidates. all want really successful teacher candidates getting licensed, passing edTPA, going out and doing great work. So if we can support them in getting through this process successfully on the first time through, that's our goal. I'm happy to collaborate. Feel free to reach out. I hope all of you are well. Take care.